The exact moment walking starts burning visceral fat. It sounds simple, but here's the truth. Most people walk for years and never actually reach this moment. Visceral fat is not like subcutaneous fat. It doesn't disappear just because you move more or feel more tired. It responds only when your body enters the right biological state. And what's surprising is that this state does not happen the moment you start walking. It arrives later, quietly, and that's exactly why so many people quit before their body ever flips the real fat-burning switch. In this video, we're not talking about calorie counting, extreme workouts, or generic weight loss advice. Instead, you'll understand what is happening inside your cells when you walk. When your body is still burning glucose, when your mitochondria begin prioritizing fat mind, and the silent metabolic crossover where visceral fat finally becomes accessible. If you've been walking consistently but wondering why belly fat feels so stubborn, or if you want to know how to make every step metabolically meaningful, this video is for you, stay until the end, because you'll learn how to recognize the exact moment your body enters visceral fat-burning mode, without any complicated devices. And if you appreciate clear, science-based explanations of how the human body truly works, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Visceral fat is not silent in the way we once believed. It is not simply excess fat sitting deep in the abdominal cavity, hidden behind muscle and organs. In reality, visceral fat behaves like a living biological organ, constantly sending and receiving signals that directly influence your entire metabolic system. This explains why some people may not appear overweight externally, yet carry significant health risks internally. Unlike subcutaneous fat, visceral fat is highly metabolically active. It doesn't merely exist, it communicates. Visceral fat cells release inflammatory cytokines, small signaling molecules with powerful effects. As these cytokines increase, the body enters a state of low-grade chronic inflammation, a dangerous condition because it quietly disrupts blood vessels, heart function, liver metabolism, and immune balance long before obvious symptoms appear. At the same time, visceral fat reduces insulin sensitivity. Insulin acts as a key that allows glucose to enter cells and be used for energy. When visceral fat accumulates, its chemical signals cause cells to gradually ignore insulin's message. Blood sugar remains elevated, the pancreas is forced to work harder, and insulin resistance begins to develop. This biological cascade is one of the primary pathways leading to type 2 diabetes, even in individuals who are not visibly obese. Even more critically, visceral fat communicates directly with the liver through the portal vein. This means inflammatory signals and fatty acids from visceral fat reach the liver first, forcing it to alter how it manages energy. The liver begins storing more fat, producing excess glucose, and reshaping the body's metabolic priorities. This is why visceral fat is closely linked not only to waist size, but to fatty liver disease, abnormal lipid profiles, and cardiovascular risk. So when we talk about visceral fat, we are not talking about appearance. We are talking about a misfiring metabolic control center. And the greatest challenge is this: the human body does not easily access visceral fat as fuel. From an evolutionary perspective, visceral fat is a strategic reserve, protected and mobilized only when internal conditions signal safety and stability. This explains why many people exercise intensely, yet see little change in visceral fat. High physiological stress raises cortisol, the body's stress hormone. Elevated cortisol signals protection, not release, of visceral fat. The harder the body is pushed, the more it defends these deep energy stores. Increased intensity often shifts metabolism back toward glucose, not fat. To influence visceral fat, the body must enter a very different state: stable oxygen delivery, balanced hormones, a calm nervous system, and metabolic safety. This is the crucial point most people are never taught. Visceral fat does not respond to surface-level effort. It responds to the internal biological environment. And it is precisely here that something as simple as walking begins to reveal its true power, not at the first step, but at the moment when the body finally feels safe enough to tap into its deepest energy reserves. Walking can burn visceral fat, but not immediately. This is one of the biggest misconceptions that causes many people to feel discouraged and quit too early. They begin walking with the expectation that a few minutes of movement should instantly target deep belly fat. But biology does not operate on desire. It operates on energy sequence. The moment you start walking, your body is not thinking about fat at all. In the first few seconds, the fastest energy system activates, the phosphagen system, which uses readily available ATP stored in muscle cells. This is an emergency energy source, instant and short-lived, much like switching on a flashlight during a power outage. It exists only to initiate movement. Soon after, the body transitions into glycolysis, drawing glucose from the bloodstream and glycogen from the muscles. This is the phase most people recognize. Heart rate rises, breathing quickens, and the sensation of working out becomes noticeable. Yet at this stage, fat, especially visceral fat, is still not part of the equation. From the body's perspective, glucose is simply the most accessible and efficient fuel available. What's critical to understand is that the human body always prioritizes the safest and easiest energy source in the current moment. When energy demand rises suddenly, the nervous system chooses speed and reliability. Fat oxidation, particularly visceral fat utilization, is slower, oxygen-dependent, and metabolically complex. It is not the first choice. Burning fat requires stable oxygen delivery, a calm nervous system, and coordinated mitochondrial activity. If breathing is still erratic, if physiological stress remains elevated, or if the body is still assessing energy demand, fat oxidation simply does not receive clearance. This explains why the early minutes of walking rarely trigger deep metabolic change, even when effort feels significant. This misunderstanding leads many people to misread their body's signals. They walk for 5 or 10 minutes, feel little intensity, no sweat, no burn, and assume walking is ineffective. In reality, this phase is like starting up a large factory. You wouldn't expect a complex production line to reach full capacity the moment the power is switched on. Visceral fat is mobilized only when the body senses stability, when energy demand has leveled, stress signals are low, and conditions are safe enough to access deeper reserves. Walking is not about instant fat burning. It is about creating the internal conditions that allow fat, especially visceral fat, to be used later. And, in the next phase, that critical metabolic shift finally begins to take shape. Then, after the early minutes that seem uneventful, your body quietly approaches a moment most people never notice. There is no alarm, no surge of energy, no obvious signal telling you something important has just happened. Yet biologically, this is the decisive point, the moment the fat-burning switch turns on. The human body operates through precise metabolic thresholds. As you continue walking at a steady pace, energy demand stabilizes. Breathing becomes rhythmic, and the nervous system begins to register safety. At this point, the body crosses an invisible internal line where fuel preference shifts from glucose to fat. In exercise physiology, this moment is known as the fat oxidation threshold, also referred to as the metabolic crossover. This crossover is not abstract. It is measured through the respiratory exchange ratio, RER, the relationship between oxygen consumption and carbon dioxide production. When glucose dominates, RER is higher. As fat oxidation increases, RER drops. This subtle shift reflects a profound biological decision. The body is now ready to access deeper energy reserves. What makes this moment remarkable is that you barely feel it. There is no dramatic burning sensation, no rush. But inside your cells, a cascade of changes unfolds. Mitochondria, the body's energy factories, begin pulling fatty acids into their pathways. Beta oxidation ramps up, breaking fat molecules down into a steady stream of ATP. At this point, fat is no longer a backup option. It becomes an active fuel source. This transition not only involves subcutaneous fat, but also begins to open access to visceral fat. However, visceral fat joins the process only once fat oxidation machinery is fully engaged, as it requires deeper mitochondrial involvement and a favorable hormonal environment. This metabolic shift often feels like settling into a smoother rhythm. Many people notice that walking suddenly feels easier rather than harder. This is not because effort has decreased, but because fuel efficiency has improved. Fat provides slower, steadier energy, allowing movement to continue without constant nervous system stimulation. Because this moment is quiet and internal, many people never realize they've reached it, or worse, they stop walking just before it happens. They end their session precisely when the body is finally ready to burn fat efficiently. Understanding this invisible threshold completely changes how walking should be approached. Walking is not about steps or minutes alone. It is about guiding the body into a specific metabolic state. Once this threshold is crossed, each additional minute is no longer warm-up. It becomes meaningful, targeted fat utilization. And in the next section, we'll explore what allows you to enter and sustain this fat-burning state with consistency and precision. If the metabolic shift described earlier is an invisible internal line, then heart rate is the most reliable external indicator that you've crossed it. This is a point the video emphasizes clearly. You don't need expensive devices or complex calculations. Your body already provides the signals if you know how to read them. From a physiological standpoint, 50–70% of your maximum heart rate is considered the optimal zone for fat oxidation. In this range, energy demand is high enough to activate deeper metabolic pathways, yet not so intense that the body reverts to glucose as its primary fuel. In other words, this is the sweet spot where fat, especially visceral fat, can finally be utilized. When heart rate stays too low, the metabolic signal to mitochondria remains weak. The body doesn't yet require a sustained energy source, so fat oxidation stays minimal. On the other hand, when heart rate rises too high, the sympathetic nervous system dominates, cortisol increases, and the body returns to what it knows best: rapid glucose use. In this high-intensity state, visceral fat remains protected, not mobilized. The key lies in moderation and stability. When heart rate rises gradually and then stabilizes in the moderate zone, the body receives a crucial message. Energy demand is consistent, conditions are safe, and shifting toward fat utilization makes sense. This is the biological environment in which visceral fat becomes accessible. What's remarkable is that you don't need a heart rate monitor to recognize this state. The signs are subtle but reliable. Your breathing becomes deeper yet controlled, allowing you to speak comfortably. Your steps settle into a steady rhythm. And most notably, you experience a sense of finding your flow, a state where movement no longer feels forced. This flow state is not accidental. It reflects a transition in nervous system regulation, from vigilance to coordination. Stress signals decrease, oxygen delivery improves, and mitochondrial efficiency rises. In this condition, fat oxidation is not only activated, it becomes sustainable minute after minute. Many people make the mistake of accelerating too quickly, assuming higher heart rate equals greater fat burn. In reality, allowing heart rate to rise progressively is what enables proper metabolic adaptation. This gradual increase synchronizes breathing, oxygen availability, and enzymatic activity involved in beta oxidation. Once heart rate is held in the optimal zone, visceral fat is no longer locked away. It begins contributing to energy production. Understanding heart rate reframes walking entirely. Instead of focusing on speed or distance, you begin prioritizing physiological state. You slow down when needed, maintain rhythm once stabilized, and give your body time to remain in the fat-burning zone. And this refinement leads directly into the next question: how to extend this metabolic state and turn it into a long-term biological habit. Not all fat in the body is treated equally. This is a crucial biological reality that is often overlooked. Subcutaneous fat and visceral fat differ not only in location, but in the level of physiological protection the body assigns to them. Subcutaneous fat is relatively accessible. It sits closer to the surface, has better blood flow, and is typically mobilized earlier when energy is needed. Visceral fat, however, is a very different story. Visceral fat surrounds vital organs such as the liver, intestines, and kidneys. From a survival perspective, this is a strategic zone. As a result, the body allows visceral fat to be used only when very specific biological conditions are met. If these conditions are not present, visceral fat remains protected no matter how much effort you apply. The first condition is low and stable cortisol levels. Cortisol is the stress hormone, and stress signals danger to the body. When cortisol rises, the body interprets the environment as unsafe. In this state, it protects visceral fat and turns to glucose for rapid energy instead. This is why overly intense or stressful workouts often fail to reduce visceral fat as effectively as people expect. The second condition is adequate and continuous oxygen delivery. Oxygen is essential for fat oxidation. Unlike glucose, which can be used relatively quickly under low oxygen conditions, fat, especially visceral fat, requires a well-functioning respiratory and circulatory system. Shallow or irregular breathing delays this process. The third, and perhaps most critical condition, is stable mitochondrial function. Visceral fat cannot be utilized unless the cell's energy factories are ready. Mitochondria need time, rhythm, and a supportive hormonal environment to increase beta oxidation capacity. When the body is constantly pushed into alarm mode, this stability never emerges. This is precisely why walking stands out as such an effective tool for addressing visceral fat. Walking does not shock the system. It does not spike cortisol. Instead, it gently guides the nervous system into a state of biological safety, where the body perceives stability and control. In this state, oxygen delivery improves, heart rate stabilizes, and mitochondria gain the conditions they need to operate efficiently. In other words, walking doesn't force the body to burn fat. It creates an environment in which the body feels safe enough to do so. And for visceral fat, this sense of safety is the deciding factor. When stress signals drop, hormones balance, and energy flows in an orderly way, the deepest fat reserves finally become accessible. This is not a weakness of the body, but a highly intelligent protective mechanism. And walking, through its gentle consistency, works with that mechanism rather than against it. Once we understand why visceral fat responds only under specific biological conditions, we arrive at a crucial concept highlighted in the video: the steady-state metabolic window. This is the phase where walking stops being simple movement and becomes a targeted, highly effective fat-burning process. This window does not open immediately. It emerges only after the body has moved beyond the initial energy systems. When heart rate stabilizes, breathing becomes rhythmic, and the nervous system no longer signals alert. At this point, oxygen delivery, energy demand, and fat oxidation enter a state of balance. The body is no longer constantly adjusting, it settles into smooth metabolic operation, where each step is supported by a steady flow of energy derived from fat. In this state, visceral fat burning becomes most efficient. Not because effort increases, but because the entire metabolic system is aligned. Mitochondria operate at an optimal capacity. Beta oxidation is sustained, and stress hormones stay out of the way. Visceral fat is no longer locked away. It becomes an active contributor to energy production. This is why the video emphasizes a counterintuitive truth. A 20-minute walk is not the same as a 40-minute walk, even at the same pace. The difference is not calories, it's the amount of time spent inside the steady-state metabolic window. For many people, the first 10-15 minutes are simply preparation. The real metabolic value often lies in the second half of the walk, once the window has opened. This explains why short walks, even when consistent, often produce slow results, while longer walks lead to noticeable changes without higher intensity. It's not greater effort, it's allowing the body enough time to enter and remain in the correct biological state. Visceral fat does not respond to urgency. It responds to prolonged stability. The steady-state window also explains a common experience: why walking often feels easier the longer you continue. Once fat becomes the primary fuel source, the body no longer relies on constant nervous system stimulation. Energy arrives more slowly but steadily, allowing movement to continue without fatigue spikes. Understanding this concept transforms how walking is perceived. Instead of asking, "How many minutes is enough?" the better question becomes, "How can I help my body enter the steady-state window sooner and stay there longer?" And that insight is the foundation for turning walking from a healthy habit into a powerful metabolic tool, especially for reducing visceral fat. Walking is not just about whether you move, it's about how you move. Three seemingly small factors: posture, pace, and breathing directly determine whether the body opens the door to fat burning and how long it stays open. Many people walk for sufficient time, yet never reach deep metabolic efficiency, simply because these elements are overlooked. First is posture. When you walk upright with relaxed shoulders and a neutral spine, the diaphragm has room to fully descend. This allows the lungs to expand properly and improves oxygen delivery to the bloodstream. Oxygen is essential for fat oxidation. A subtle postural adjustment can significantly influence how effectively fat, especially visceral fat, enters the energy stream. In contrast, slouching or hunching restricts diaphragmatic movement, leads to shallow breathing, and delays fat metabolism even while you're in motion. Next is pace. Walking faster does not automatically mean better results. When pace exceeds a moderate level, heart rate spikes, energy demand rises abruptly, and the body reflexively shifts back to glucose burning. In this state, effort feels higher, but visceral fat remains protected. On the other hand, walking too slowly may not provide enough stimulus to open the metabolic window. Effective walking happens at a moderate rhythm, where heart rate stabilizes and the body no longer needs constant adjustment. The third and most underestimated factor is breathing. Shallow, rapid, or irregular breathing signals that the nervous system is still in a state of alert. Cortisol remains elevated. Oxygen delivery is suboptimal, and mitochondria cannot sustain efficient fat oxidation. In contrast, deep, slow, rhythmic breathing sends a clear message of safety. When this signal is reinforced, the nervous system permits a shift toward fat as the primary fuel source. When these three elements align, upright posture, moderate pace, and deep, steady breathing, you create nearly ideal biological conditions. Heart rate stabilizes, oxygen availability increases, stress hormones decrease, and beta oxidation can continue uninterrupted. Walking transforms from effort into a smooth metabolic flow. Many people describe a sense of finding their rhythm. Steps feel lighter, breathing syncs naturally with movement, and energy becomes more sustainable. Understanding this allows you to refine walking intelligently. Instead of pushing speed, you adjust posture. Instead of counting steps, you listen to your breath. And instead of chasing fatigue, you seek stability. It is within this stability that fat, especially visceral fat, is truly mobilized. And in the next section, we'll explore why daily consistency matters even more than a single perfect walk. One of the most powerful points emphasized in the video and often underestimated is the power of consistency. Walking doesn't just create effects within individual sessions. More importantly, it reprograms how the body responds to movement over time. With regular walking, the body no longer perceives movement as a stressor. It begins to prepare in advance. First, consistent walking increases both the number and efficiency of mitochondria. These energy factories become more abundant and more capable of using fat as fuel. As mitochondrial density and performance improve, beta oxidation activates more quickly in subsequent walks. This means the metabolic threshold, where the body shifts from glucose to fat, arrives earlier. At the same time, regular walking helps stabilize insulin and cortisol. Stable insulin reduces the tendency to store energy around vital organs, while balanced cortisol removes the danger signal that prompts the body to protect deep fat reserves. When these hormones are regulated, the body begins each walk with a far more favorable biological foundation for fat burning. Another often overlooked adaptation is improved capillary circulation. Regular walking enhances capillary density and function, allowing oxygen and fatty acids to reach mitochondria more efficiently. This is especially critical for visceral fat, which requires robust oxygen delivery and transport capacity to be mobilized. The combined result of these adaptations is simple yet profound. The next time you walk, your body enters fat-burning mode sooner than before. Heart rate stabilizes faster. Breathing settles into rhythm earlier. And the steady-state metabolic window opens with less delay. Many people notice that within minutes, they reach a smooth, effortless flow that previously took much longer to achieve. This is the advantage of consistency over perfection. Not every walk needs flawless posture or ideal pacing. What matters is repetition long enough for the body to learn. Once the body has learned, it begins optimizing metabolic responses automatically. Walking no longer starts from zero each day, it picks up where it left off. Understanding this mechanism shifts expectations. Instead of chasing immediate results in a single session, you invest in biological momentum. Each consistent walk shortens the path to fat burning, lengthens the effective window, and strengthens sustainability. Over time, visceral fat transitions from stubborn to metabolically accessible, not because you forced your body, but because you trained it intelligently. If you've stayed until this point, you've likely realized something essential. Walking was never a small thing. It's not just steps. It's not a filler habit. When understood correctly, walking becomes a way of communicating with your body through patience, stability, and respect for natural biology. Your body is not working against you. It has been protecting you in the smartest way it knows. Visceral fat isn't stubborn. It's simply waiting for the right conditions to be used. And now, you understand what those conditions are. You don't need to push harder. You don't need to move faster. You need to move consistently. Breathe intentionally, and give your body time. Every steady step, every deep breath, every repeated walk sends a signal of safety inward. And quietly, biologically, your body responds. If this video helped you see walking through a new lens, more scientific, more human, more realistic, please tap the like button to support evidence-based content. And if you want to keep learning how to work with your biology instead of fighting it, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We don't promise miracles. We offer real understanding. And understanding, over time, changes everything, one step at a time.